G'day, I'm Greg Murphy and I'm here with Nathan Wallis, neuroscience educator, and in this episode we're going to be talking about fatigue and driving. Great to see you, mate.
Kia ora, Greg.
We know that fatigue is enormous, and I mean people are driving tired and ill-prepared a lot.
Yep.
What's going on in the brain tell me about that and fatigue.
I mean, fatigue is like a form of stress to the brain. So we go back to those scales again. That the more tired you get, then the more aroused your brainstem is. So correspondingly, you start to lose that brain number 4, that ability to focus your attention, to appropriately, ascertain what the risk is. All of that good stuff in brain number 4. I mean, probably nothing more than sleep in lots of ways undoes that and arouses that brainstem.
Yeah.
Sleep is so fundamental to our well-being. And
so what is it? What is fatigue then? I suppose what's a bit?
Well, fatigue
is just that obvious.
It can just be fatigue, can just be a lack of sleep. Or maybe you're getting the appropriate number of hours of sleep, but you're not getting a quality sleep. I mean, that's one of the things. One of the major practices in New Zealand is to have a few beers before you go to bed. We could have a whole talk on that, just that New Zealand has a very binge drinking culture. So our levels of what we think is normal amounts of alcohol is quite high in comparison to other countries. So, I mean, we know if you have beers before you go to sleep, then actually you have multiple times where you wake up during the night. So that interferes, you don't remember it because your brain links those sleep cycles together. But that when you've had multiple wakeful periods, then that stops you going into REM sleep. And it's really the more REM sleep you have, the more refreshed you are. In fact, just to give you an idea of how important REM sleep is, when we deprive rats of REM sleep, they die at the same rate as if you're starving them. So REM sleep seems to be to your physiological body as important as nutrition and eating. And yet we still don't fully understand everything that happens in REM sleep. We just know that if you don't get that, you're incredibly fatigued. So same with marijuana, someone who's getting stoned just before they go to bed, it's the same as someone who's getting drunk just before they go to bed. It might, in your perception, feel like you're falling to sleep easier. It might even feel like you're going into a deeper sleep, but you're not. If we had you hooked up to the equipment, you are staying in a light sleep and you're waking up frequently without even being conscious of it. So it's just that if you're going to have beers before you go to bed, don't do it just before you go to bed. It's very different to have had them at 6 o'clock when you get home. You have a couple of beers, then you've got a couple of hours before you go to bed. Then you'll get a much higher quality sleep than the person who downs the beer, goes to the toilet, and then goes to bed.
People must be just getting so used to being in that whole fatigue state that they just don't even recognise it anymore.
And then we come back to that thing where your reality isn't really what's happening in front of you, it's what you perceive reality to be and what you predict it to be. So people have normalised the amount of stress and not sleeping. We've so by the time someone nods off and is conscious of the fact that I just nodded off, you typically had lots of micro sleeps before that. So you've actually been unsafe for quite a long time before you get to the conscious point. So that would mean any sensible person, you would think, as soon as you have that first nod off, you would know that, you would pull over and have a sleep. But of course, if you don't have metacognition, you don't know that, you just think, that's the start of it. It's working against you that if you've never had an accident, I mean, most of us have a 100% success rate at having felt that nod and yet carried on driving and not had a car accident. So that works against us because we start to perceive that, I can do that, it's not as bad as it seems. It's similar to that ego stuff we talked about before, our risk assessment, perceived risk as opposed to actual risk. So we're encouraged in that situation to perceive that we're not really at risk, that I can fight that I can overcome that. Whereas actually you're at quite a high risk by the time you're nodding off at the wheel.
And so then, you go to work and you're driving along and it's like, okay, no, I can manage this because I'm just going to have a coffee or I'm going to have an energy drink.
Yeah.
That's going to give me the pep that I need to, just continue on.
Yeah. And it does in a way because it certainly elevates your heart rate, and so that your elevated heart rate, that's really arousing that brainstem though. So it gives you that bolt of feeling, and so you'll have a quick second of being more alert. But it's kind of like energy drinks are like we equate them to like cigarette smoking. People who have a cigarette perceive that they're less stressed afterwards, and yet actually on a heart monitor their heart rate's just gone up and their blood pressure's just gone up, their body's more stressed, even though they perceive themselves to have relaxed from having a cigarette. Same with an energy drink. You might perceive that you've given yourself a little burst, but actually that's followed by a lull. That's how they work. So it's followed by a lull after a cigarette to make you want another cigarette. The energy drink is followed by a lull. So sugar, caffeine, are the 4 things that really arouse your brainstem. So the things we want to avoid. We talk about CATs: caffeine, alcohol, tobacco, and sugar. They're the 4 things that lower your neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to be adaptable, and that's really because it arouses a lot of those stress response systems. That little burst we get from the coffee feels like it's waking us up. It's actually giving a little burst to the brainstem, the very thing we're trying to calm down.
It's completely working in the opposite.
It's counterproductive. Yeah, it's an illusion that it's helping. Even though when you have that coffee, you might feel more awake for the next 5-10 minutes. It's going to be followed by even more tiredness than you had before you had the coffee.
Yeah, and so really, I mean, okay, sleep is so critically important to be able to for us to function properly. But and then on top of that, then the best thing you can be doing, from my experience too, and from being prepared to drive a race car and for endurance for a couple of hours at a time, whatever it is. I mean that physical preparation, you sleep 100%. I know if I didn't have sleep and you just turn up at the racetrack the next morning, and you got to go. It is so hard to get engaged. Yes, you start to when you're, all the internal drugs come into your system through when you get in the race car and it all starts to naturally,
the dopamine and stuff,
dopamine and adrenaline, all that kind of that gets you going. And I mean, it's an incredible stuff. Even though when you're used to it, you don't feel it anymore. It's still there, and it does get you going. But the other things are clearly hydration, making sure that your body is hydrated, and obviously feeding it correctly with the right food to actually do that.
And regularly, it's also timing.
And regularly,
because
I know if I don't drink, well, even when I'm just a normal day, if I don't drink enough water, I end up being tired before I should be.
Yeah, people underestimate how much hydration, because your brain, just how much it impacts, because your brain is going to shut down from the last on, the first off. So it's those higher functions in brain number 4 are the very ones that start to, as soon as you start to get dehydrated, shut down. You see this right across all the sort of different industries I work in. When you work with kids with behaviour problems, one of the most fundamental things we can do to respond to a kid that's misbehaving is, first of all, give them a drink of water. Because actually what you want to do is bring online that frontal cortex. They haven't got a fully developed one because they're a child, but you want to sort of use as much of it as there. So you really start off on the right foot by giving them a drink of water straight away. That helps to hydrate the brain. You have to regulate and calm the brainstem when you drink water. If you're dysregulated, you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, your ancestors, you couldn't drink a glass of water halfway through that chase because you would drown. So when you bring the glass of water up to your mouth and you go to drink, in that second just before you drink, you actually re-regulate your whole system and you regulate your breathing in order to be able to drink, and that helps to calm the brainstem down. So it's working on 2 levels. It's the ritual of calming your brainstem by drinking, because you can't do that in a dysregulated state, but it's also hydrating you.
How have we managed to misinform with some of these things? So, I mean, it's advertising. It's just what we read, what we believe. I don't know, but we really have misinformed when it comes to these kinds of things. When you are trying to, you are, say you've got some fatigue and here we are. I mean, how many people believe that if I have an energy drink or have a coffee, I'm going to be better off.
Yeah, that's right. And you're right, that is advertising and it is belief and it is based on partial truth, because people click into that, I've had a coffee and I get a little spark, so it must be true, but they're not seeing the whole process. So, sleep is different than most people think it is, because you have a perception that you go to bed and you go to sleep for 7 hours and then you wake up again. But actually, you've learned to link sleep cycles together. I mean, you see this with young children, because they don't come home from the hospital generally and sleep 8 hours. They sleep for a couple of hours. We actually have, like you have, 3 or 4 sleep cycles during the night, where you're in a light sleep, you go into a deep sleep. When we talk about REM sleep, that's just rapid eye movement, where your eyes move rapidly, and we just know that's a deep restorative sleep. But you've got 4 of these cycles throughout the night, and you learn to link your sleep cycles together. So you're not conscious of the fact that there's 4 times a night when you come close to waking up, because that's when you pull your blankets off the cover and pull the covers off your partner and roll over, and you're close to waking, but you've learned to link your sleep cycles together. Oftentimes, mothers don't ever link their sleep cycles together again. Their kids have grown up and they've started sleeping through the night, but mum still wakes up 3 or 4 times during the night. As we get older, we wake up to go to the toilet. So we're in between our sleep cycles, we can no longer sleep through, we have to get up to go to the toilet. It's just an indication that actually you're not sleeping for 7 or 8 hours, you're linking your sleep cycles together. That's why I think when you have a sleep incident on the road where you have a microsleep, you're not necessarily aware of it, because your brain well, you're often not aware of it because your brain has learned to link your sleep cycles together, just like you're not aware when you wake up during the night. Just like the people who have alcohol just before they go to sleep aren't aware that they're waking up multiple times throughout the night and preventing that REM sleep, because your brain isn't focused on concentrating on that. But because sleep is so, fundamental, it's down in that brain number one. So, when you don't get enough sleep and you're fatigued, then brain number one, as the foundation, is going to affect all the other brains as well. So like your motor skill brain, that automatic behaviour, that's going to be slightly slower if you're fatigued and your brain stem's aroused. Then there's much more activity happening in that brain number one. You just don't have the juice to operate the rest of it properly. So brain number two, your reflex times are going to go down. Brain number three, your emotional brain, you're much more susceptible to stress, perceiving things negatively, reading someone's facial expression as negative rather than positive. Your emotional brain's also going to be fatigued. And then, of course, you've got your frontal cortex, the one you need for driving. That's judging distance and, and risk assessment. All of those three brains are going to be impacted by a lack of sleep. So it really is, fundamental to our well-being. And if you haven't had sleep, the higher in the brain it is, but go back to those scales again, someone who's fatigued has got hardly any frontal cortex going on. So their ability to really be safe on the road, to really assess risk and stuff, they might perceive in their ego, no, I'm all right. But actually, if you're sleep fatigued, you're not all right. It's just not really biologically impossible for you to access all that stuff.
And there's probably there's almost, I don't know, there probably is a worse place, but it's got to be one of the worst places to be, sitting in a cab all by yourself then.
Yep.
In that situation where that's all happening.
Yeah. So, and then if you're...
Really challenging.
Yep. Have the heater up too high and you're toasty warm as well, that's going to add to that sleep inducement stuff. You're kind of in some ways set up in a cab, being isolated, being in a temperature-controlled environment. You're kind of set up in some ways to be... to fail. To fail, yeah.
Mm. I would imagine, drugs is a big issue too.
Yep.
With these days, at any time, people in any job.
Yeah.
But again, if someone's taking marijuana or pee or whatever it is, the effects that's going to have, combined with some of those other things like fatigue as well.
Yeah, and then they all have different interactions with the brain, those drugs. Peas, are clearly a whole lot worse than marijuana. I think if people are on marijuana, they've got an understanding and their brain knows they're a little bit fatigued. They know that their reaction times are a little bit slower often. Whereas methamphetamine, creates this illusion they're actually sharper.
Yeah.
So people will actually believe that they're a better driver on something like methamphetamine. Whereas people don't necessarily believe that as much on marijuana because it doesn't interact with the brain in the same way. So it's particularly dangerous because you're perceiving that
everything's cool.
That everything's cool when you may not have slept for 24 hours, but you think, oh no, I've taken this drug that's made me Superman, whereas it's actually made you very disabled man. It's your perception. You're now riding on that automatic brain, and you're really hoping that, you're really hoping that no novel stuff does come up because your perception is that you're sharper, but if we measured you, your reaction times are way slower. That thing we talked about, how you're, 93% of what you're seeing is prediction.
Yep.
That'll go up a lot when you're on P. It's probably 99% of what you're seeing is prediction, and there's only really 1% left to picks up on that, on that stuff. But because you don't know it, your ego makes you even more confident. So you're massively...
It just compounds.
It does, it compounds, yeah. Methamphetamine is a big problem because of the way it interacts with the brain like that and fools people into thinking... Similar to what we said about the energy drinks before, that you have an energy drink, you feel like you're more sharp and alert, but actually all that stuff goes downhill, not uphill.
It's just multiplied massively on
That's right.
drugs.
Yep, yeah. Mm.
So with the whole sleep thing and fatigue, if it's you're driving along, if you have the nous to actually go, right, I'm going to take a power nap. Does it work? I personally, I think it does.
Yeah.
Because from experience.
Yep, it does. I think that's why we call it a power nap now instead of a nana nap. Rather than it being associated with like a negative thing that you were tired, so you needed sleep, have a nana nap. We call it a power nap now because we know, NASA did all that research around just what seems to be the ideal length of sleep. Everyone's got their own genome, so people are slightly different, but I think they come up with 24 to 26 minutes. So if I am tired and I pull over on the side of the road and I have a 24-minute nap, then actually, according to their research, that gives you about 3.5 hours of alertness from a 24-minute sleep. It is to do with how long you sleep, though. It's not the longer the better. because if you sleep for longer, you go into a more deep sleep cycle. If you then wake up, 40 minutes later, you can feel groggier and more tired than when you went to sleep. So it is about the length, but yeah, the power nap is a real thing. It does really help as long as you do it for the right amount of time.
So that needs to be brought into more of a change in our culture and the way we operate, and part of what is supported for say truck drivers. If it's at that point where they need to be encouraged to actually do these things.
I wonder if there are less accidents. I mean, it'd be hard to compare, but in a country like Spain, where it's normal practice for everyone to have a siesta. I mean, I know myself, this is one of the things I learned from COVID, that actually having that afternoon sleep for about 20 minutes makes the rest of my afternoon far, far more productive than if I just go for one whole day. When I was younger, I used to think, I don't want to go to sleep. Well, I don't know if I could have gone to sleep when I was younger. It was hard to go to sleep during the middle of the day. I needed kids and to be sleep deprived and stuff before I could do that. But I would have thought that going to sleep in the middle of the day would just sort of disengage me, and I'd be disengaged for the rest of the afternoon. But the opposite happens. My productive period's in the morning, in the first half of the day, and the last half of the day, I do more stuff that I don't have to focus so hard on. It's a wee bit more automatic.
Much harder to write an email that makes sense.
That's right, I'm trying to write a book, so I get much more book writing done in the morning and not in the afternoon. But if I have that afternoon sleep, either just that 20 minutes, that 24 minutes, then actually the afternoon's like another morning. So, it'll be a wise cultural change to take on board to incorporate those sleeps.
The
siesta.
So with everything we've just talked about there around the sleep and trying to control that, and power naps and all the things we're doing wrong, then we go and throw in shift work. The whole rhythm of sleep, circadian rhythms.
Well, that's it.
So how do we go and manage all that then on top of it?
Your circadian rhythm and shift work don't really match up very well together. Like your circadian rhythm is basically your wake and sleep cycle. So, I go to sleep at around about 11 o'clock at night and I wake up at about 6 o'clock in the morning. So that's moderated by essentially two hormones, melatonin that makes you go to sleep. And so that's, if I'm going to sleep at 11 o'clock at night, the melatonin is building up. At 10 o'clock, I'm yawning, because I've got a fair bit of melatonin in my system. If I stay up until 11:30, I might fall asleep on the couch because I've got so much melatonin. So that's what's making you go to sleep. And then cortisol is the hormone that's waking you up in the morning. So when my alarm goes off at 6, I'm normally pretty much awake before that. I sometimes wake up at 1 minute to 6 and I'm getting up because it becomes so cyclic that your body expects that circadian rhythm. You do have this ability to adjust, because it's interesting, we seem to have a 25-hour biological clock, but we live in a 24-hour world. So when we put people into dark caves with no reference to night and day and no clocks and stuff, we find that they go into a 25-hour circadian rhythm. And because we live in a 24-hour world, that means there's always a little bit of catch-up, and you're always playing to adjust for that hour. That's why I don't wake up at exactly 7 each day. It might be a few minutes before, it might be a few minutes after, because you're always adjusting slightly. But, so how that works, it means that if you're not, if for shift work, your body takes a long time to adjust. I mean, I think this is what was happening with my brother-in-law, is that really the shift had finished. He was supposed to go to bed that day to get sleep before going to work that night, but he had just finished another shift where his circadian rhythm had been that you are awake during the day. So technically we can say he had the time to go to sleep, but it meant he had to go to sleep after only having been up for about 8 hours. So in order to get the sleep, to sleep bank it, so that he had enough sleep. Whereas really, I think what was happening for him and most drivers is when that changed on that first day, which was the day he was killed, there is that much higher risk of having an accident, because your circadian rhythm takes longer to adjust than that. It's just not very biologically respectful to have people shifting from shift to shift, because your circadian rhythm just doesn't shift that quickly.
But if you get into, and you spend, 10 years doing shift work, night work, you're at night.
Oh, you're fine then.
You're fine.
You're fine, because your circadian rhythm is adjusted to that. It's switching from one to the other.
Doesn't matter if it's dark.
That's right. You get used to your circadian rhythm. People that are always doing,
the same
I used to have a job where I worked night shift at a drug and alcohol detox centre, and it was 11 o'clock at night till 7 o'clock in the morning. And so for those couple of years, that was fine. Because you adjusted your circadian rhythm to that. I mean, you do things to adjust. I was having to go to sleep during the day, in the daylight, so you have a face mask thing on, so because the darker it is, the more melatonin you release. So sleeping during the day can be challenging, but you compensate for those things.
So we've really got to then, you've got to have really good systems in place if you're going to adjust people
Yep.
from doing that shift work and going from a day cycle to a night cycle. You've got to give the ability or the time to be able to prepare
to biologically change. I mean, like I said in that example, it's very well theoretically to say to someone, oh, well, you've got 8 hours to go to sleep there. But if you're asking them to do that after only having been up for 8 hours, that's not really very realistic. So to switch over, there probably should have been at least an extra day.
What should it be? I mean, what is there a
Well, there hasn't been a lot of research to show exactly what it should be.
Yeah.
I'd imagine for a lot of people it's going to take more than one day. But at least having that one day where you try to go to bed and go to sleep, but you've only been up for 8 hours and you only sleep for a light time, then the next day when you go to bed at that time, it should be better. It should be better. There's a little bit of an adjustment. But I mean, for many people it's going to take 2 or 3 or 4 days to change that. So it's hard to get the literature to support actually switching someone from one to the other without having a decent break in between in order to change the circadian rhythm.
But there does need to be more respect for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
From those that are asking people to do these things,
Yep,
there needs to be more time given.
Yeah.
You can't just turn it around. I mean, I think that's a logical thing to expect, that you can't just switch over.
I noticed when I was in China, did lots of work in China, and drugs and like melatonin, the one that makes you go to sleep, you can just buy over the counter in China. So I noticed lots more people used that to regulate their rhythm, to change it.
Oh.
It's like, oh, I've only been up for 8 hours, but I need to go to sleep. I will take a couple of melatonin pills, and that's the natural chemical that puts you to sleep, helps to adjust your circadian rhythm. I mean, we don't have the free access to those. You'd have to go to the doctor to get them here. But I mean, that's biological support, but you're still going to have a higher accident rate than someone who is actually just given the time to adjust.
Naturally.
Naturally. I mean, that thing about being in a 25-hour biological clock, we're living in a 24-hour world, means we've got a little bit of adaptability. So you think things like daylight savings, well, that's only an hour, that we might be able to adapt easily, given this 25-hour thing. But putting that on top of a world where we're already quite sleep deprived and people are already fatigued, they're already, maybe waking up multiple times during the night. Because you see this in the statistics around the accidents. When we gain an hour, I mean, we've just gained an hour. I felt that the other day when
Didn't
I was
just?
Yeah, and I was like, oh no, I've got another hour. Oh, chill.
Yeah.
Oh,
I looked at my phone. I'm like, oh, that's great.
Yeah, I could literally feel it. It's like, I can chill out a bit because there's a bit of extra time. But life's given me another hour. But it works the other way. When we lose that hour. Away. So now the person, their brain could still be loaded with, filling up with melatonin. They haven't got the right cortisol to be awake yet. If everything was ideal.
It doesn't sound like much, right? But it has a big effect. It can have a massive effect.
Yeah. When you look at the statistics around the increased number of accidents on that day, that's the worst day of the year for car accidents when we lose that hour. Because people are already sleep deprived. So to add that extra hour on is just the straw that broke the camel's back, often.
Another thing to think about.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Nathan. Another really insightful discussion. So if you want to check out some more of these, just head to eyesupnz.co.nz.